What's going on there, fellas? In my efforts to build an upload schedule for myself, I put up the community post, asked you guys what kind of series of videos you like that maybe I can tie to a specific day of the week to kind of take away a bit of that having to come up with the topic. I'm given a topic, it's my job to do a good job with it. I tend to work better that way. Some of you guys expressed your concern about being tied to an upload schedule. Trust me, I think it's better this way. If I'm just, Sunday is the questions day. That's a series that I like. I feel like it's helpful. It gets a reasonable amount of views. All around good stuff. My job is to answer the questions to the best of my ability. And in this community post where I was trying to build myself a little weekly upload schedule, I mentioned that I like videos where the kind of format is my top some number of tips or exercises for XYZ task. And I mentioned, I'm sorry, that sounds a little bit clickbaity, and it for sure is. It's very YouTube title-y. But I actually really enjoy that format of video. I find it very easy to sneak in a lot of practically actionable knowledge, kind of if-then scenarios. There's a lot of, I think, information that I can squeeze into those videos in a pretty natural manner. So while the topic might seem, pretty basic, pretty entry-level information, I really think I can squeeze some good stuff into those. I think it's just a good format. I think it's a good opportunity to provide my specific rationale for why I might be doing popular exercises, why I might avoid certain popular exercises, or what kind of scenarios I would look for when prescribing a specific exercise. So that's something we're going to get into. Every Tuesday on the Tuesday, we're going to do a Top Tuesdays, right? Where I give you my top XYZ things for XYZ task. So that's what we're going to get into today. Now, if you guys have any ideas for these, please do not hesitate to let me know. Because now that I've got, every Sunday I'm doing a question answering video, that's simple enough. I know how to keep doing that. That doesn't require my creativity. It requires your guys's to ask the questions, and then I do my best to give some helpful answers in your efforts to get stronger. Cool. Each Tuesday, we're going to go do my top things for whatever thing. So if you guys have specific things you want to know, this requires a little bit too much creativity on my part, so let me know what you want to see. Today, we're going to talk about my top 3 favorite exercises for developing back strength, and specifically back strength as it pertains to the squat. We're going to kind of get into why I feel that's very important to mention. So in the question answering video, somebody mentioned how they liked my breakdown of deadlift assistance movements into a couple of general core categories. And we could swap out different exercises within these categories, but we have 4 kind of general movements that we're looking to hit. Something for the midsection, like whether that be a sit-up, whether that be a hanging leg raise, whether that be a plank, some kind of rowing motion, for kind of that positional specific development of the upper back, position specific strength, as well as general hypertrophy of the upper back, a little bit of extra time, kind of GPP for the lower back, then some kind of hip hinge and some kind of knee flexion. And they mentioned they like that, and they would like to hear kind of those general, these are the categories I look for to fill for motions other than the deadlift. And in that video, I mentioned that it gets a little bit complicated for some other lifts, depending on the person's technique. There might be some exercise slots that might not be there for other lifters. And the squat was one I mentioned that gets a little bit more complicated. If we go over to like weightlifting circles, you'll often hear squatting broken into just kind of 2 general categories of assistance work. We just have the extra quad work, so the knee extensors, and then you'll hear this term back strength, right? Because when we're doing a weightlifting style squat, usually we are doing it from a pretty narrow-ish stance, maybe shoulder width, maybe hip width. So we're not requiring this huge abduction strength. We don't need these ton of strength in these really lengthened position of the adductors. So this general kind of idea we could have of a hip strength slot isn't necessarily needed. And then we're also not calling upon our hip hinge very much because we're not very wide and we're not very leaned forward. So we're not actually using very much hinging. So the other category they'll talk about is quads and back. And the back strength is very important. We need to have strong enough spinal erectors to maintain that upright posture to effectively express the strength we built in the quads. The Seeker guys have talked about this a good bit, about how you need a lot of back strength to adequately express and maintain an upright squat, even if you have the quads to do so. And especially because in a high bar squat, we're lengthening that lever the bar has on us, right? In a low bar squat, we get to take that bar lower and lower. We get to shorten that lever arm. So the demands to maintain our back position go down. When we're doing a high bar, that lever becomes quite a bit longer. So the amount of strength to keep that line relatively straight goes up. So they'll often break it into just two general categories. And the reason I mentioned earlier that we need to talk about back strength that is specific to the squat is because in a deadlift, most people's best deadlifting is going to be done from a position of greater flexion than their best squatting is going to be done. We're going to be a little bit more extended for 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 people's best squatting is going to be done from a more extended position than their best deadlifting. It's a very common strategy to let that thoracic spine round a little bit, to lengthen the arms, to shorten that length from our hip to our shoulder socket, right? That's a very common strategy, and that's how most people's deadlifting is going to be done, with at least a bit of round. And the big difference there also is a deadlift, you can finish a deadlift with your back compromising in position. It's a lot harder to finish a squat, right? So when it comes to back strength, it very much is position dependent, right? Because strength is kind of position specific. So we can get very strong in a lengthened position and have some carryover to a shortened position, but it's certainly not one-to-one. We get strong in the ranges of motion we strengthen, right? So if we say back strength, there might be a list of exercises that are extremely effective for developing back strength when it comes to the deadlift in this slightly more flexed position that are going to do a really good job carrying over to the deadlift, and they're not going to carry over meaningfully to the squat. Deadlifting itself, depending on your technique, might fall into this category. Now, if you do a clean pull in extension, you might see some correlation between your deadlift and your squat, even past just being a beginner. But the higher level you get, a lot of people will find their deadlift will go up and their squat will not follow. Sometimes you'll see the reverse is true, where your squat will go up and your deadlift will follow suit. Again, kind of this idea being we can do a squat from pristine positions, but we can do a deadlift and we can still finish it from compromised positions. So if the squat goes up, the deadlift very well might follow, but the reverse is not always true. So something like a deficit deadlift, a pull from the floor, any of these things where we're really strengthening this rounded over position might tremendously build our kind of erector strength relevant to the deadlift, and we might not actually see that carry over to our squat very much. We need to strengthen this more extended position that we are expecting to squat from. Now, I'm not telling you to squat from extension. I'm not telling you to squat with your back arched. We still want to lock that rib cage down, get a good brace. We don't want to have that anterior tilt of the pelvis. We don't want to do any of these things. But on average, the optimal position is going to be more extended than it is on the deadlift. So my massive preamble out of the way, what are my top three? You say, Sam, I suspect that my back strength is holding back my squat. I feel like I've developed pretty strong legs and I'm failing to express that. Maybe my torso is compromising as I stand up. My torso is kind of folding up a little bit. What do you recommend that I do? This is you asking me hypothetically here. The first one, the number one that I will often throw out there is if they have access, the safety squat bar. Just the nature of the bar, it cambers the weight slightly in front of you, so it places this tremendous demand on our kind of thoracic extensors to fight to maintain that position, because the whole time that thing is trying to bend you forward. We can use pretty significant loads, greater loads than we could on something like the front squat, and it's a bit more specific than something like the front squat. Now, if you don't have an SSB, we could get some of those mid-back development gains from doing a front squat. We'll probably expect to see a little bit less direct carryover because it looks less like a back squat. It's going to be a little bit less tonnage, but we can get some of those position-specific strength benefits. But the SSB is kind of king. It's very specific, and anybody that I identify to have an issue in their torso strength, limiting their squat, the SSB is absolutely one of the first things I'll throw at them. And it's for this reason that if I've got a guy who squats high bar as his primary squat, more often than not, I'm going to throw an SSB at him as his secondary motion, because the squat's going to do a tremendous job developing the quads, but our erector strength is not going to be developed quite as much as someone who squats with a little bit more forward lean. So we want to, with our accessory, we kind of want to pick up what our main lift misses, right? Rather than double down on what our main lift does, we kind of want to pick up those missing pieces. So if someone squats low bar as their primary motion with a good bit of forward lean, we're probably going to be doing enough low bar that we're kind of getting all the unique benefits of that. I wouldn't necessarily make their secondary squat variation a good morning because it would be redundant. I would rather make it a high bar squat because, okay, we really taxed our spinal erectors, are kind of hinging, our hips, but maybe the quads are not being sufficiently trained by this movement. We're going to select a variation that picks up what that main lift neglects. And following that principle, I find an SSB squat supplements a high bar very, very well. Now we're kind of going in order of, I would say, the magnitude I feel these are likely to help. And the second biggest one in my book is going to be a good morning, specifically a good morning with a pause in the lowest position. Now, there's kind of two general ways that we can execute a good morning. There's the way that Dr. Mike does it as a little bit more of a bodybuilding hamstring movement, where we keep our legs a little bit more stiff, a little bit less bend in the knee, and you see some backwards travel of the knee as we push the hips back. The knees will often fall behind the heels to get a greater stretch on the hamstrings. And the other way you will see some athletes execute it is they actually will leave their knee right over their ankle, or they might even push it forward slightly. So it looks like this really bastardized half squat. Now, by doing these, we're going to kind of shift the muscular emphasis. When our knee is a little bit straighter in the Dr. Mike style, we're going to be biasing towards the hamstring. And we have a little bit more bend at the knee, we're going to be biasing a little bit more towards the glutes. Now, generally, people are going to be able to do more weight on the version where their legs are less stiff. Just a stronger position in general. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a selling point or a con. I would say it depends on what you're doing them for. If we're doing them for back strength, you might find that at this point in the workout, the more stiff leg version as a kind of self-limiting variation is what you need to do to get a little bit of weight off the bar. Or you might find some benefit from doing the heavier version with the knees traveling forward slightly more. But I would say these are a very, very, very solid, very specific exercise for developing that erector strength in the squat. And I kind of fundamentally misunderstood the application of good morning in some specific use cases for a very long time. For a very, very long time, I thought, okay, well, a good morning is going to carry over to someone who squats with a lot of forward lean because there's going to be overlap there. But it wouldn't be as helpful for someone who squats quite upright like myself. And it wasn't until later and I had a better understanding of what exactly I was working on that I understood that that erector strength that I'm building is actually what allows me to maintain that upright posture with very heavy weights. A perfect example of this is how many guys in the multiply era were massive advocates for good mornings for developing the squat. If you watch how they squatted with their feet ultra wide, toes super turned out, a suit, maybe a little bit of suspect depth, most of them were squatting from a high-ish bar position. They were actually quite upright through the torso, but they were still seeing tremendous benefit from training these good mornings. And it was so that they could have the erector strength to maintain that upright posture and get the most out of the suit. Very similarly, the Sika guys made a video talking about how John Hack is able to squat high bar very upright and effectively utilize his quads specifically because of how strong his erectors are. They're kind of a requisite to express that. And you can kind of see that in the Chinese weightlifting team. When you have a lot of athletes with kind of a similar build, shorter legs, longer torso, the leg strength is going to be developed relatively quickly. The squatting strength is going to shoot up and the back strength will often lag behind. And you can see in their program, they are hell-bent in not letting their athletes fall into that trap that is common to the build of having a weak back. You'll constantly see a lot of back extensions and pulls following their squats always. So in terms of how to apply these things, there's a lot of ways. Like you're going to derive a lot of the benefit just from challenging the motion and working hard on it. But usually for the SSB, I just usually make that a secondary squat day and apply a pretty similar approach to whatever I'm doing on my primary day. Maybe leave the reps a little bit higher. Maybe only peak towards a triple rather than peak towards a top single because it's a variation. I don't really care exactly what my 1RM is on it, but there's a lot of things we can do. I just make it a secondary day. In terms of how to apply these good mornings, like I said, you can select between this more stiff-legged version versus this more knee-bent version to fit your goals. Tons of different ways to do these. We can do them with a belt. We can do them without a belt. As they get heavier, we can put on the belt to get a little bit of extra bracing practice, very specific to our squat, because the good morning has a lot of direct application. If we want to get better at resisting our back rounding over with a weight sitting on our back in a high bar position, it makes sense to just put a bar in a high bar position and lean forward with it to as much forward lean as we get in the squat, or preferably a good bit further than we get in the squat. So we get this greater challenge on our erectors. We can practice different strategies of squeezing through the upper back, different strategies of bracing, and whatever leads to better performance on the good morning will also probably similarly be good strategies for maintaining your torso rigidity when you go to do a squat. I like working them anywhere from about 5 to 12 reps. That's my personal preference. I know back in the day, West Side guys would use them as a max effort variation and work up to heavy sets of 1 to 3. I find that that is fatiguing enough on the erector directors that I would rather use that training economy towards my deadlift. Though if I was a squat only guy, maybe I could mess around with that. I find we can derive most of the benefits in that 5 to 12 range, using a little bit less weight, being a little bit more precise with our positions. Because I find when people take them up to heavy 1, 2, 3s, yeah, it's a good strength stimulus, but we're compromising our position. We're rounding a little bit as we reverse the weight. And that might be a very effective builder for the deadlift. Kind of like we talked about earlier, we're going to be a little bit more strict with making sure that when we do these, we're not fudging our position through our torso. We're not kind of squishing with the weight to get it moving, because we don't want to see that in our squat. And the whole reason we're doing these is to train resisting that squishing of the torso. Now, you might have guessed this, but my number 3 exercise for back strength for the squat is going to be back extensions, specifically back extensions done from a back squat position. So whether it's off a 45-degree back extension or off of a glute ham raise, we're going to put that bar up on the traps again, because we want to be working all of the spinal erectors all the way up to the neck, all of the positions that are going to be challenged when we're squatting. In terms of magnitude, yeah, usually the first thing I would throw at it would be the SSB squat, and then the second thing I would throw at it would be some kind of good morning. But the back extensions are a really good option because they're kind of spammable. We can do them 2-3 days a week and run up a bunch of extra volume in what is relatively specific. We have this bar in a back squat position. We come up into this like semi-extended position that might mirror where we might be in a squat. And again, in this very specific way, we're practicing resisting the squishing of our torso. You can get a lot of these benefits from a back extension done with weight in the hand, but I find that it's going to challenge the mid and upper back a little bit more if we do it in a back squat position. And that's where a lot of people, their position will start to compromise. It'll show in the upper and mid back, and then it'll kind of bleed through the whole back. So I like to make sure we challenge that if the goal of the back extensions isn't just general development of the posterior chain, in which case you can kind of load them however you want. You can hold a weight, you can hold a barbell, you can hold a back squat position, you can hold a sandbag. All are fine for running up volume for the posterior chain, because I'm a big fan of doing back extensions often. There's a reason that many Russian athletes will talk about how they do just about no variations. Their training is hyper specific. Oh, but I do back extensions 4 days a week, right? I think the back extension is to someone with strength goals what the curl is to the gym bro. It's always a good idea, whether it's light for active recovery or heavy for a bit of a strength stimulus, kind of somewhere in between as a hypertrophy stimulus. They're a very good idea most of the time. You know, maybe the range that we load them in needs to vary because it isn't always a good idea to do them ultra heavy. Sure, but goddamn, I always warm up with some back extensions. I always cool down with some back extensions. I'm big on them. And if you're going to be doing them to aid your squat development, I prefer doing them from that back squat position. I did not get the carryover to my squat. I didn't feel as though they were improving my positional maintenance until I started doing them the way weightlifters do, from a back squat position with a barbell. I had done tons and tons and tons of them the way Paris and many other athletes like to do them, where you hold the weight in your hands. And I found that gave me tremendous lockout strength in my deadlift, but I didn't feel it was developing my squat until I started doing them this way. So let me know if you guys got any ideas for this series. Thank you for watching. As always, I appreciate you boys.